I didn't think the laundromat on 8th Street would ever mean anything. It was the kind of place you pass 100 times: buzzing lights, 2 vending machines that never worked, a bell above the door that chimed too loud. I used to go late at night, when it was mostly empty. Something about the machines humming in rows felt steadier than my own head. That's where I first noticed her. She wasn't doing anything special, just folding a towel in half, then again, her hands careful like the fabric mattered. A small crease appeared on her forehead when she concentrated. She glanced up once and caught me staring. I looked away too quickly, pretending to study the soda machine. The next week, she was there again. Same night. Same careful folding. "You always come this late?" she asked, not looking at me, just shaking out a pillowcase. "Guess so," I said. "Avoids the crowds." She smiled like she understood. It wasn't the kind of smile that asks you to keep talking. More like, "I hear you, that's enough." After that, it turned into routine. I'd see her maybe twice a week. Sometimes we said nothing, just worked side by side. Sometimes she'd ask small things: if I had enough quarters, if I trusted the dryers here, if the machines ever finished on time. Her name, I learned by accident, was Elise. The attendant called it when she'd left a sweater in one of the dryers. Elise. It sounded soft, like it should be written in pen instead of typed. I never told her mine. Not at first. There were moments I caught myself memorizing more than I should, the way she always smoothed the edges of her folded clothes with her palms, or how she tucked loose hair behind her ear when it fell forward. She had this steady patience, like nothing around her could rush her. I didn't have patience. Most nights I scrolled my phone too long, half writing messages I never sent. Friends I'd lost touch with, girls I didn't call back, family group chats I left unread. It was easier to leave things unfinished. But Elise had a way of making silence not feel unfinished. One night, the machine jammed on me. I hit the side of it harder than I should, and she laughed quietly, not at me, but like she'd seen it before. She walked over, pressed a button I hadn't noticed, and the drum started again. "Don't fight the machines," she said. "They always win." I laughed, though it came out more awkward than smooth. I wanted to say something back, something clever, but all that came was, "Thanks. Anytime," she said, then went back to her folding. That night I noticed her hands more than usual. Small rings, nothing flashy. One of them looked older, worn thin, like it had been taken on and off too many times. I almost asked, but didn't. Weeks passed like that. Quiet exchanges, side-by-side laundry, a rhythm neither of us announced but kept. I started to wonder if she noticed I came even on nights I didn't need to. Then, one Tuesday, she broke it. "Don't think I haven't noticed," she said, sliding coins into the slot. "Noticed what?" I asked, pretending not to know. "That you do laundry more often than anyone I've ever met." She gave me that same smile, the one that said she already knew the answer. I didn't reply. Just folded the same t-shirt twice. That night, I left before she did. But when I got home, there was a message waiting on my phone, from an unknown number. "You forgot your sweatshirt." I put it in the basket by the door. It was signed Elise. I stared at it longer than I should have, thumb hovering over the keyboard, the machine hum still ringing in my ears. The first time I went to her apartment, it wasn't planned. She'd caught me outside, balancing a lopsided laundry basket that was one shift away from collapsing. "Bring it up," she said. "I've got tea." It sounded casual, but my chest tightened. I followed her up the narrow stairs, each step feeling like it might be a mistake I couldn't take back. Her place was quiet in the way that feels lived in. A lamp in the corner, half-burnt candle on the table, books stacked instead of shelved. It smelled faintly of citrus and detergent. "You can put it there," she said, pointing at the couch. Then she moved toward the kitchen, already setting water to boil. I stood longer than I should have, looking at a framed photo on the wall. 2 kids. Teenagers. A boy and a girl, both with her eyes. "You don't have to hover," she called. "Sit." So I sat. My hands rested on my knees like I was back in school waiting to be called on. When she returned with 2 mugs, she didn't hand one directly. Just placed it in front of me, sat across the table, and blew on her own. Divorced 5 years, she said suddenly, as if continuing a conversation I hadn't realized we'd started. Shared custody until they left for college. I nodded, though my throat felt dry. They visit less now. Busy, you know. Which is good. She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Means they're living their lives. I didn't know what to say, so I wrapped both hands around the mug. The tea was too hot, but I held it anyway. And you? She asked. Me? You've got that look. Like you're in between places. Not quite where you're supposed to be yet. It stung how accurate she was. I laughed softly, trying to play it off. Maybe. I'm just figuring things out. She leaned back, studying me. You're young. That's what you're supposed to be doing. Her words should have felt like distance, but the way she said young wasn't dismissive. More like she was reminding herself. The kettle still ticked faintly from cooling down. I caught myself staring at her hands again, one curled around the mug, thumb rubbing the rim absent-mindedly. A thin scar ran across her knuckle. I wanted to ask, but didn't. We stayed like that for a while, the silence stretching but not breaking. The tea cooled. Streetlights flickered outside her window. At some point she laughed quietly. This is strange, isn't it? Yeah, I admitted. But neither of us stood up. When I finally did, setting the empty mug down, she reached for the basket I'd brought. Her hand brushed mine, not deliberate, not accidental. Just long enough for me to notice how warm her skin was. I told myself it was nothing. Just a passing touch. But walking back down the stairs, I couldn't shake the thought. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. After that night in her apartment, things shifted. We didn't name it, but I felt it. The pauses grew longer, the silences heavier. Even the laundromat seemed smaller, like the hum of the machines pushed us closer. One evening, I walked in late, expecting her usual spot. Empty. Her basket wasn't there, no careful folding, no half-smile when I fumbled with quarters. For a second I thought maybe it had ended, whatever this was. But then she appeared behind me, pushing through the door with one arm full of clothes. Her hair was damp, like she'd just showered, strands darkened at the edges. You're late, she said softly. I could say the same, I replied. She gave me a look, amused, tired, something in between, and moved past. We worked side by side, like always, but something was off. She kept glancing toward the door, toward the window. I thought about asking, but stopped myself. Halfway through, the bell above the door chimed again. A man stepped in, older, maybe late 40s, carrying a basket. He nodded at her. Elise. Mark, she said, polite but flat. I caught the flicker in her eyes. He moved to the far end, but his presence pressed on the room. She folded slower, her hands steadier than usual. I wanted to ask who he was, but the question stayed in my throat. When Mark finally left, she exhaled, almost inaudible. I pretended not to notice, but she caught me looking. Ex-husband, she said, answering what I hadn't asked. Oh. I nodded, trying not to show more than that. Her gaze lingered, maybe to see if I'd flinch. I didn't. I just folded the same shirt twice. She let out the faintest laugh, shaking her head. Later, when the last dryer buzzed, she sat on the folding table instead of standing. Legs crossed, mug of tea from the vending machine in her hands. You ever think, she said slowly, about how easy it is to start talking to someone you shouldn't? My chest tightened. All the time. Her eyes lifted at that, searching mine. The machines clicked, the neon outside hummed. I shifted closer without meaning to, leaning against the table beside her. Our shoulders almost touched. Almost. Her breath caught. Or maybe that was me. She turned slightly, close enough I could see the fine lines at the edge of her eyes, the scar on her knuckle I'd memorized. For a moment, Everything held still. Then she blinked, pulled back just an inch. We should finish up. I nodded, throat dry. But as I gathered my clothes, she brushed past me. Not clumsy, deliberate. Her hand grazed my arm, light but enough to spark every thought I'd tried to bury. We didn't say goodnight. And maybe that silence was louder than words. It happened on a Tuesday again. The laundromat had closed early for repairs, so we walked instead. She suggested it, casually, like it was the only option. The night was cool. A thin wind carried the smell of rain that hadn't fallen yet. Street lamps cut the sidewalk into uneven patches of light. We didn't talk much at first. Just footsteps, the scrape of my sneakers, the soft sound of her coat brushing with each step. At the corner, she slowed. Sat on a low bench near the pharmacy. I stayed standing, hands shoved in my pockets, not sure if I should sit too. Do you ever wonder, she said after a while, why it's easier to talk to strangers than people who actually know you? I sat then, not too close, not too far. Because strangers can't use it against you later. She gave a half smile, eyes fixed on the empty street. Or maybe because they leave before it matters. I looked at her profile, the faint tiredness in her eyes, the kind that doesn't come from lack of sleep. The kind that comes from years. You think that's what this is? I asked, softer than I meant. Just strangers passing through? She turned at that. For the first time, she held my gaze long enough I felt exposed. I don't know, she whispered. Maybe it should be. Something tightened in my chest. I wanted to say I don't want it to be. Instead, I stared at the ground, at a crack running through the pavement like it couldn't hold itself together either. You're too young, she said suddenly, like it had been waiting in her throat. And she stopped. I should know better. I swallowed hard. The words came out before I could filter them. Then why do I wait for these nights? Her breath caught. She looked at me, really looked. Her hands fidgeted with the sleeve of her coat, tugging at a loose thread. Because you don't know what you want yet, she said. That's not true. My voice cracked, quiet but firm. I know what I feel. We sat in that charged silence. A car passed, headlights sweeping over us, then gone. The bench creaked faintly when she shifted closer, only an inch, but enough to notice. Her hand brushed mine where it rested on the bench. Not fully touching, just the barest edge of contact, like she was testing how far she could go without falling. I wanted to close the distance. Every nerve in me screamed to. But she drew her hand back just slightly, leaving only the ghost of it behind. Her voice was barely audible. What happens if we don't stop here? The question hung between us. I didn't answer. Because I wasn't sure I could. The next week, she wasn't there. At first, I thought it was timing. Maybe she'd come earlier, maybe later. I waited longer than I should have, circling the same block twice before heading inside. The machines hummed, but the space felt hollow without her. 2 nights later, still nothing. Her absence wasn't loud, but it had weight. The basket I carried felt heavier, like I was dragging silence along with me. I finally saw her on a Saturday afternoon, of all times. She was at the cafe across from the laundromat, sitting by the window with a girl, maybe 19, maybe 20. Same eyes, same small crease in the forehead when she laughed. Her daughter. They were deep in conversation. Elisa's hand rested lightly on the girl's wrist, her expression softer than I'd ever seen. I almost went in. Almost. But she looked up right then, as if she felt me outside. Our eyes met through the glass. She froze for a second, then smiled faintly, polite, distant. The kind of smile you give a cashier or someone holding the door. Not the one she gave me. I walked away before I could read more into it. After that, she stopped showing up at night. A week passed. Then 2. I told myself it was coincidence, schedule changes, nothing personal. But deep down I knew. Something had shifted. I drafted a message once, late at night. Just, everything okay? But the cursor blinked too long. I deleted it. Instead, I went back to my old routines. The machines, the half-finished texts, the scrolling that led nowhere. But the silence wasn't steady anymore. It felt like a sentence someone forgot to finish. Then, one evening, I found a folded piece of paper tucked into the slot of my laundry basket. No name, just handwriting I recognized instantly. Some lines shouldn't be crossed. That was it. No explanation, no signature. But I didn't need one. I stared at the note until the words blurred. My chest didn't feel broken, not exactly. Just stalled. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. I slipped the note back into the basket and left it there, under a pile of clean clothes. Didn't throw it away, didn't keep it out. Just let it stay hidden the way we were. The next night, I walked by her building. The lights were on. A shadow moved past the curtains. I stopped at the door, hand hovering near the buzzer. But I didn't press it. I stood there a while, staring at the glow in her window, before walking back into the dark. It was almost a month before I saw her again. I'd stopped expecting it. But one evening I came back from work and found her standing by the steps of my building, hands buried in her coat pockets. She looked like she'd been waiting a while, though she didn't say it. "I was just passing through," she said, though we both knew she lived 3 blocks the other way. We went inside. Not her place this time, mine. Small, plain, kitchen table pushed too close to the wall. She sat, restless, her fingers drumming softly against the wood. "I shouldn't be here," she said finally. "I know." She looked up then, eyes tired but steady. "You're young. You'll figure it out. You don't need me making it complicated." Something in me broke open then, not loud, just quietly, like a thread snapping. "Complicated doesn't scare me," I said. My voice shook more than I wanted. "What scares me is you disappearing without saying anything." She froze, her hand tightening against the table. "I thought..." She stopped, took a breath. "I thought it would be easier that way. Cleaner. But I kept wondering if you waited for me. If you still looked for me at the machines." "I did," I admitted. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, close. She leaned back, pressing a hand to her forehead, almost like she regretted hearing it. "You can't know what you want yet," she whispered. "Maybe not everything," I said. "But I know I wanted those nights. I know I wanted you there." Her eyes closed for a moment, as if the words hurt. When she opened them again, they shone wet under the kitchen light. "I've spent years holding things in. Holding myself in. And now here I am, sitting in your kitchen like..." She laughed once, bitter. "Like I don't know any better." I reached across the table before I could stop myself. My hand barely brushed hers. This time she didn't pull away. We stayed like that, both hands resting, not gripping, not holding, just touching. Finally, she looked at me. No smile, no pretense. Just the truth written across her face. "I don't know where this goes," she said softly. "Me either." Her shoulders loosened at that. She exhaled, a shaky breath that felt like release. Then she turned her hand over, letting her palm rest against mine. Not a kiss, not a confession. Just skin to skin, steady, quiet. "Okay," she whispered. And for the first time, it felt enough. Time did its usual work. Weeks turned into months, the sharp edges softening into something we didn't have to name. We never made a decision, not the way people usually do. No confessions, no declarations. Just a gradual folding into each other's lives. I'd see her in smaller hours now, not only at night, mornings when the light cut across the sidewalk, afternoons at the cafe. Sometimes her daughter would stop by while I was there, already knowing my name, already measuring me with the same careful eyes Elise had. And somehow, it felt okay. Not easy, but okay. We built routines without saying we were building them. Tea on my side of the table, black coffee on hers. A walk on Tuesdays if the weather held. The bench near the pharmacy, where she once asked if strangers were easier to talk to. We didn't sit as far apart anymore. There were pauses, of course. Quiet doubts that surfaced when she looked at me too long, or when I caught myself wondering how other people might see us. But the doubts never lasted. They dissolved in ordinary gestures, her hand passing me a mug, the warmth of her laugh when I misfolded a towel, the way she'd wait for me to finish a sentence even when I stumbled over the words. It wasn't perfect. She carried history with her, the scar on her knuckle, the years she'd learned to be alone. I carried my own, unfinished plans, questions about where I was going. But somehow, instead of colliding, our lives settled into the same rhythm. One evening, months after that night in my kitchen, we sat again on that same bench by the pharmacy. The air was warm, faintly buzzing with summer. She leaned back, eyes half closed, her coffee cooling between her hands. "You realize," she murmured, "we never did stop." I glanced at her, then at the crack in the pavement running under our feet, the one I'd stared at that night when I couldn't say what I felt. "No," I said quietly. "We didn't." She opened her eyes then, met mine. And in that look was everything we hadn't said, the risk, the hesitation, the choosing anyway. The bell above the laundromat door chimed faintly across the street, though neither of us moved. I don't know why that sound stayed with me, maybe because it felt like a reminder that beginnings don't always end. Sometimes they just continue. And sitting there, with her shoulder just barely against mine, I realized that was enough. More than enough. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?